The halls of the Verethi imperial palace were made of smooth silver stone, glowing softly under the light of twin moons. It was a place of power, ruled by logic and tradition. Feelings, curiosity, and unnecessary thoughts were considered distractions. Yet, Princess Zyra couldn't help herself. She walked down the silent corridors, her long violet robe trailing behind her. Her golden eyes flickered with uncertainty. A strange feeling had taken root in her heart, a feeling she did not understand. It all started when the humans were captured. Zyra had never seen a human before. The Verethi Empire taught that humans were weak, unpredictable, and dangerous. Their minds were chaotic, their emotions uncontrollable. That was why the Emperor had ordered all human prisoners to be locked away and studied. But when Zyra saw one particular human, she felt something strange. His name was Ethan Carter. He did not look frightened like the others. He did not scream or beg for mercy. Instead, he stared at the Verethi guards with sharp eyes, as if studying them instead. When he was questioned, he answered with confidence. When he was threatened, he smirked. And when Zyra saw him in chains, she felt something she could not explain. She wanted to know more. Zyra stopped in front of the prison chamber. Two Verethi guards stood outside, their armor shining under the cold lights. They immediately straightened when they saw her. "Princess," one of them said, bowing his head, "you should not be here. I have permission from the Emperor." Zyra lied smoothly. She held up a small data pad, flashing it in front of them. It was blank, but the guards did not check. No one questioned the Emperor's daughter. The guards stepped aside, and the heavy doors slid open. Zyra stepped inside, and the door closed behind her. The chamber was small and simple. The walls were smooth and silver like the rest of the palace, but the air felt heavier here. A single energy barrier separated her from the prisoner. Ethan Carter sat on the cold metal bench, his hands resting on his knees. He was a young human, maybe in his late 20s. His short brown hair was messy, and his uniform was torn from the struggle during his capture. But his green eyes were calm, almost amused. "I was wondering when one of you would come to talk," Ethan said casually. Zyra frowned. His voice was not desperate or angry. It was confident. "You are not afraid," she said, stepping closer. Ethan tilted his head. "Should I be? You are a prisoner of the Verethi Empire. You are alone, surrounded by enemies. You may never leave this place." Ethan leaned back against the wall, stretching his legs. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Zyra narrowed her eyes. Was he joking? No, there was something different about him. The other prisoners either cried for mercy or shouted in anger, but this human was different. "You are strange," she muttered. Ethan smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." Zyra studied him carefully. His posture, his expressions, his words, everything about him was unlike anything she had ever seen. She had expected fear, but instead, she found curiosity staring back at her. "I have read about humans," she said. "Your species is unpredictable. You allow emotions to control you. You act without logic." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. But that's what makes us strong." Zyra raised an eyebrow. "Emotions make you weak." Ethan chuckled. "That's what your people believe. But tell me something. Princess, why are you here?" Zyra opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. Why was she here? To observe him, to study him, or because she felt something when she saw him? Her heart was beating faster than usual. She clenched her fists, pushing the feeling away. "I came to understand humans." Ethan's eyes softened. "Then you should start by understanding yourself first." Zyra froze. His words struck something deep inside her. Ethan smiled. "You feel it, don't you? That little spark in your mind. That's called curiosity." Curiosity. The Verethi Empire taught that curiosity led to chaos. It was the first step toward losing control. But standing here, in front of this human, Zyra felt it burning inside her. And for the first time in her life, She did not want to ignore it. She turned sharply toward the door. "I will return," she said, her voice more confident than before. Ethan grinned. "I'll be waiting, Princess." As the door closed behind her, Kyra realized something deeply unsettling. Humans were supposed to be the ones studied. But now it was she who felt exposed. Princess Zyra couldn't stop thinking about the human. She sat in her private chamber, staring at the silver walls. The palace around her was quiet, filled with the usual cold efficiency of the Verethi Empire. Everything followed a strict order. Everything had a purpose. And yet, Ethan Carter did not fit into that order. His confidence, his fearlessness, his curiosity about her, instead of the other way around. No human should behave like that. Zyra clenched her fists. She should forget about him. He was just a prisoner, an insignificant piece in the Empire's grand plan. But her mind kept returning to his words. "You should start by understanding yourself first." It was a challenge, and for some reason, she couldn't ignore it. Finally, she stood up. She would visit him again. The guards outside the prison chamber stiffened when they saw her approach. "Princess," one of them said hesitantly, "you wish to enter again?" Thyra nodded. "Open the door." The guards exchanged glances but obeyed. As the heavy doors slid open, Zyra stepped inside, her heart pounding slightly faster than usual. Ethan was still seated on the metal bench, arms crossed behind his head. He looked up as she entered and smirked. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come back," he said. Zyra narrowed her eyes. "You act as if you expected me." Ethan shrugged. "I had a feeling." "A feeling," she repeated, stepping closer to the energy barrier. "Do humans rely on feelings instead of logic?" Ethan chuckled. "Sometimes. Logic is good, but feelings tell you what really matters." Zyra frowned. "That is an inefficient way to live." Ethan leaned forward. "Then tell me something, Princess. If logic is all that matters, why are you here again?" Zyra opened her mouth, but no answer came. Why was she here? She had no reason to return. She had no orders from her father. And yet, she stood before this human, seeking what? More answers, or something else entirely? Her silence made Ethan's grin widen. "See, you felt something, and you followed it." Zyra shook her head. "I came to study you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Sure you did." A tense silence filled the room. The energy barrier between them hummed softly, separating them by mere inches. Zyra studied him carefully. "Why are you so calm?" Ethan tilted his head. "What do you mean? You are a prisoner. You should be afraid." Ethan chuckled. "Afraid of what? Sitting in a room all day?" He shrugged. "I've been through worse." Zyra's curiosity deepened. "Worse? Explain." Ethan leaned back against the wall. "I was a pilot. My ship crashed on a hostile planet once, ran out of food, water, and had to survive for weeks. I've seen worse than this." Zyra's golden eyes widened slightly. "Most species would have given up in such a situation. How did you survive?" Ethan smiled. "Humans adapt. We don't give up just because the odds are against us." Zyra felt something stir inside her. The Verethi Empire valued strength, but they believed survival was about power and control. Yet this human survived with neither. "How did you escape?" she asked, despite herself. Ethan smirked. "I didn't wait for rescue. I fixed my ship and flew myself out." Zyra's eyes narrowed. "That is impossible. A single pilot cannot repair a starship alone." Ethan chuckled. "Tell that to me a few years ago." Zyra felt frustration bubbling inside her. Everything she had learned about humans said they were weaker than the Verethi. They were supposed to be inferior. And yet, this human had survived alone, fought against the odds, and now sat here, unafraid. What made him different? Zyra suddenly asked, "What do humans fear?" Ethan's smile faded slightly. He looked at her for a moment, as if deciding whether to answer. Then, he said softly, losing what we care about. Zyra blinked. That was not the answer she expected. Ethan leaned forward. What about you, princess? What do you fear? Zyra stiffened. I fear nothing. Ethan smirked. Liar. Her hands clenched into fists. No one had ever dared to speak to her like that. Ethan continued. If you feared nothing, you wouldn't be standing here, trying so hard to prove me wrong. Zyra's heart pounded. For the first time, she felt exposed. He was challenging her in a way no one ever had. He was forcing her to question herself. And worse, she couldn't look away. Before she could respond, the chamber door suddenly slid open. A tall figure in dark robes entered, the Imperial Advisor, one of the Emperor's closest officials. His piercing silver eyes landed on Zyra, then shifted to Ethan. His expression remained cold, unreadable. Princess, he said, the Emperor has requested your presence. Zyra quickly straightened. Now. Yes. The advisor's gaze sharpened, and he wishes to discuss the humans. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Guess I'm a popular guy. Zyra ignored him, forcing herself to remain calm. She turned toward the door, but before leaving, she glanced back at Ethan. He gave her a confident grin. See you soon, princess. Zyra didn't reply, but as she walked away, one thought refused to leave her mind. Why did this human make her feel so strange? Princess Zyra walked through the grand halls of the Verethi Palace, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. The human, Ethan Carter, had left a strange impression on her. He was fearless, unpredictable, and unlike any other creature she had met before. She should not care. He was a prisoner, a lesser being. Yet, his words stayed with her. What do you fear? Zyra shook her head, pushing away the thought as she reached the towering golden doors of the Emperor's throne room. The guards bowed and stepped aside. The doors slid open with a low hum, revealing a vast chamber bathed in cold blue light. At the far end, seated on an ornate black throne, was Emperor Vereth, her father. His golden eyes glowed beneath his dark crown, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood the Imperial Advisor, his piercing gaze watching her every move. Zyra stepped forward and bowed. You called for me, father. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. Yes. His voice was deep, filled with authority. I heard you have taken interest in the human prisoner. Zyra kept her posture firm. I only sought to understand him. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. And, what have you learned? She hesitated. Should she tell the truth? She had expected Ethan to be weak. Instead, he was strong, not in physical power, but in will. He did not break, even in captivity. The Verethi Empire ruled by force, by control. Yet Ethan obeyed no one. But Zyra knew she couldn't say that aloud. The human is strange, she finally said. He is not like the others. The Emperor studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the advisor. The advisor stepped forward. We have been studying humans for many years, princess. They are an inferior species, weak, reckless, and driven by foolish emotions. Zyra did not respond, but something in her heart disagreed. The advisor continued. However, their ability to adapt makes them unpredictable. This makes them dangerous. The Emperor's gaze darkened. And dangerous things must be controlled or destroyed. Zyra felt a chill run down her spine. You mean to kill him? The Emperor's golden eyes locked onto her. I mean to use him. Zyra's fists clenched. For what purpose? The Emperor leaned back in his throne. Humans are rare in our empire. They are valuable. He may serve a greater purpose, or he may be nothing but a distraction. His voice grew cold. If he is the latter, then he will be eliminated. Zyra felt something tighten in her chest. The idea of Ethan being killed did not sit well with her, and she did not understand why. But she had no power to question the Emperor's decision. Understood, she said, lowering her head. The Emperor watched her for a long moment, then waved his hand. "You are dismissed." Sarah turned and left the throne room, her mind racing. As she walked through the dimly lit corridors, her thoughts kept returning to Ithan's confident smirk, his calm voice, his defiance. She had seen many species break under Verithi rule. Ithan did not. Why? She had to know. Later that night, Syra returned to the prison chamber. The guards were surprised to see her again, but did not question her orders. As the doors slid open, Ithan sat in the same relaxed position as before. He looked up, smirked, and said, "Back so soon, princess. You must really like me." Zira crossed her arms. "The Emperor sees no value in you." Ithan raised an eyebrow. "That's so. Then why am I still alive?" Zira hesitated before answering. "He believes you may have some use. If not, you will be eliminated." Ithan chuckled. "Well, that's not surprising. Your people aren't exactly known for kindness." Zira narrowed her eyes. "You speak as if humans are any better." Ithan shrugged. "We have our flaws. But at least we don't pretend to be perfect." Zira stared at him. The Verithi Empire always presented itself as superior, flawless, the greatest force in the galaxy. But Ithan had a way of challenging everything she had been taught. She stepped closer to the energy barrier. "You should fear for your life." Ithan tilted his head. "Should I?" Zira's golden eyes locked onto his. "The Emperor does not tolerate things he cannot control." Ithan grinned. "Then he's going to have a problem with me." Zira didn't know why, but she smiled just a little. But before she could say anything else, an alarm suddenly blared through the prison chamber. A red warning light flashed above them. Ithan straightened. "What's happening?" Zira's face darkened. "An intruder alert." A voice echoed through the speakers. "Warning. Unidentified ship detected near the palace. All security units, prepare for engagement." Zira's heart pounded. Who would dare attack the Verithi Empire? She turned to Ithan, who now stood with a strange look in his eyes, a look of realization. And for the first time, he wasn't smiling. The blaring alarms echoed through the prison chamber, filling the air with urgency. Princess Zira's sharp golden eyes darted to the flashing red warning lights. An unidentified ship had entered the palace's restricted airspace. Ithan stood behind the glowing energy barrier, his posture suddenly tense. "Looks like your empire has some uninvited guests," he said. Zira's mind raced. No one had ever dared to breach the Verithi Palace's defenses before. Who could it be? Another alien faction? Rebels? Or... Her eyes snapped to Ithan. "Is this your doing?" Ithan smirked, but this time there was something different about it. Less amusement, more calculation. "I'd love to take credit, but I had no way to call for help." Zira studied him carefully. He wasn't lying. A voice crackled through the palace's communication system. "All units to battle stations. Unknown vessel is attempting to land near the eastern wing." Zira clenched her fists. The eastern wing was dangerously close to the prison chambers. A group of Verithi guards rushed past the corridor outside. One of them stopped at the entrance and bowed quickly. "Princess, you must return to safety. The Emperor commands all royals to remain in the inner chambers." Zira's instinct told her to obey, but something inside her hesitated. She glanced at Ithan. His blue eyes were sharp, focused. He was watching, thinking. She knew that look. He was waiting for something. Before she could respond, the ground shook violently. A distant explosion rumbled through the palace walls. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment, the energy barrier of Ithan's cell weakened. Ithan took a quick step forward, testing the barrier with his hand. It crackled but didn't harm him. His eyes lit up. "Well, that's interesting." The power grid was unstable. If another explosion hit... Zira turned back to the guard. "Secure the lower halls. I will remain here and oversee the prisoner." The guard hesitated but nodded. "Understood, princess." He and the other soldiers hurried off, leaving Zyra alone with Ethan. Ethan crossed his arms. "You're not running for cover. Brave." Zyra ignored his words and tapped the control panel on the wall. The system was flickering, unstable. The attack was disrupting palace security. She needed answers. She turned back to Ethan. "If someone is here for you, I need to know who they are." Ethan chuckled. "You think my people sent a rescue team. I hate to disappoint you, but humans aren't that lucky." Zyra wasn't convinced. Then who would attack the palace? Ethan's smirk faded slightly. "Could be anyone. Could be people your empire made enemies of." He met her gaze. "And I bet there are a lot of them." Zyra didn't respond. It was true. The Verethi Empire had conquered many worlds, crushed many civilizations. Another explosion rocked the structure, this time much closer. The lights flickered again, and for half a second, the energy barrier around Ethan's cell disappeared completely. Ethan moved instantly. Before Zyra could react, he lunged forward, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. She reached for her weapon, but he caught her wrist. Firm, but not aggressive. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Zyra's pulse quickened. She should have been faster, stronger, but Ethan was unpredictable. His blue eyes searched hers, as if he were trying to understand her just as much as she was trying to understand him. "I'm not your enemy, princess," he said quietly. Zyra narrowed her eyes. "That's not how my people see it." Ethan let go of her wrist. "Then maybe your people are wrong." Before she could respond, the wall behind them suddenly exploded, sending debris flying. The force knocked them both down, and a massive hole was left in the structure. Smoke and fire filled the air. A dark, armored figure stepped through the wreckage, its glowing red visor scanning the room. Zyra's breath caught. It was not a human, and it was not one of her people. Ethan coughed, pushing himself up. When he saw the figure, his expression darkened. "That," he muttered, "is a problem." The intruder's voice was deep mechanical. "Target located. Proceeding with extraction." Zyra tensed. "Target." The figure took another step forward, reaching for a weapon. Ethan reacted instantly, grabbing Zyra and pulling her out of the way just as a bolt of red energy blasted through the space where she had stood. She barely had time to process what had happened before Ethan pulled her behind a piece of collapsed metal. "Okay, princess," Ethan said, breathless but focused. "New plan." Zyra glared at him. "You think I take orders from you?" Ethan smirked. "You want to live." She hesitated. Another blast shook the chamber. Zyra clenched her fists. She hated this. She hated not being in control. But at this moment, she and Ethan had a common enemy. She met his gaze. "Fine," she said, "but if you try to escape, I will stop you." Ethan grinned. "Deal." Together, they turned toward the unknown enemy, ready to fight. The air was thick with smoke and heat as the armored intruder took another step forward, its glowing red visor scanning the room. The palace alarms still blared, but the only thing Princess Zyra could hear was her own racing heartbeat. Ethan crouched beside her behind the collapsed metal, his breathing steady despite the danger. "I don't know who that is," he muttered, "but I can tell they aren't here to talk." Zyra gritted her teeth. "They called you the target. Are they after you?" Ethan shook his head. "Not sure. Could be someone who hates humans. Could be someone who hates your empire." His blue eyes flicked toward her. "Could be both." Another energy blast ripped through the wreckage, missing them by inches. Zyra didn't have time to think. She grabbed her plasma pistol from her belt and fired a precise shot at the intruder. The energy bolt struck its armor, but barely left a mark. The enemy barely flinched. "Great," Ethan muttered. "Looks like it's got shields." The armored figure raised its weapon again, but this time Ethan moved first. He grabbed a broken metal rod from the debris and hurled it with all his strength. The rod struck the enemy's arm, knocking the weapon slightly off course. Instead of hitting them directly, the blast hit the ceiling, causing chunks of stone and metal to rain down. "Move," Ethan shouted. Zara didn't hesitate. She leaped forward, dodging falling debris, and fired another shot at the intruder's head. This time, the impact made it stumble backward. "Got you," she whispered. But the victory was short-lived. The intruder's armor glowed red, and its shield flickered back to full strength. Ethan clicked his tongue. That thing's gonna take more than a couple of shots to bring down. Zara knew he was right. They needed a new strategy. Fast. The enemy straightened, then raised its arm. This time, it didn't shoot. Instead, it activated something on its wrist. A mechanical drone detached from its back, hovering in the air before scanning the room. Zara's eyes widened. "It's calling for reinforcements. Then we need to leave," Ethan said. Zara hated the idea of running. She had never backed down from a fight before. But this wasn't a battle she could win head-on. The palace trembled as another explosion rocked the walls. The damage was getting worse. If they stayed any longer, they wouldn't have a palace to fight in. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Come on, princess." She pulled away. "I don't need your help." Ethan sighed. "Fine. But unless you've got a plan to fight that thing and an army of whatever it's calling, we need to move. Now." Zara hated that he was right. Again. The enemy took another step forward, its visor glowing brighter. Zara made her decision. "There's an emergency escape tunnel behind the lower prison chamber." Ethan smirked. "See? I knew you had a plan." Without wasting another second, they ran. The armored enemy fired at them, but Zara ducked and weaved through the wreckage. Ethan kept close, his movements surprisingly fast for someone who had been a prisoner minutes ago. The passage ahead was dark and filled with smoke. The palace was falling apart. A metal beam collapsed from the ceiling just as they reached the exit. Ethan pushed Zara aside, barely avoiding the impact himself. She landed hard on the ground and glared at him. "I said I don't need your help." Ethan grinned. "You're welcome." Zara pushed herself up and ran forward, leading him down a hidden corridor. The sounds of battle faded behind them. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Ethan spoke. "So, where does this tunnel lead?" Zara hesitated. "The old hangar," she admitted. "If we can reach it, we might find a ship." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Now that's more like it." But before they could take another step, a new voice echoed through the tunnel. "Going somewhere, princess?" Zara froze. A tall Verathi warrior stepped out of the shadows, his black armor glinting in the dim light. His piercing silver eyes locked onto her. Ethan tensed. "Friend of yours?" Zara's stomach twisted. General Vorkin. One of her father's most feared commanders. And the last person she wanted to see right now. Zara's heart pounded as General Vorkin took a slow step forward, his silver eyes locked onto her. The narrow tunnel felt even smaller with him standing there, his dark armor gleaming under the dim emergency lights. Ethan shifted beside her, his stance tense. "I take it this guy isn't here to help." Zara clenched her fists. "No, he's one of my father's most loyal commanders." Vorkin smirked. "And yet here I find the princess running with a human prisoner." His voice was sharp, laced with disapproval. "Tell me, Zara, have you forgotten where your loyalties lie?" Zara lifted her chin. "I serve the Verathi Empire, but I won't let you kill an innocent man." Vorkin let out a deep chuckle. "Innocent?" He turned his gaze toward Ethan. "This human is dangerous. We received orders to eliminate him the moment he was captured." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Wow. No trial. No questions. You guys really don't believe in second chances." Vorkin ignored him. "Step aside, princess. This does not concern you." Zara stood her ground. "It does now." Vorkin's smirk faded. His fingers hovered over the hilt of his plasma blade. "Define your own people for a human. You disappoint me." Ethan sighed. Yeah. I get it. Big Bad Warrior doesn't like humans. He glanced at Scyra. You got a plan, princess. Before she could answer, a distant explosion shook the tunnel. Dust and small rocks fell from the ceiling. Vorkin's eyes narrowed. What was that? Ethan smirked. Looks like your assassin friend is still tearing through the palace. Vorkin's expression darkened. What assassin? Scyra realized something. Vorkin wasn't working with the armored intruder. Which meant, they're not with you, she asked carefully. Vorkin's silver eyes flashed with anger. No. And if someone is attacking the palace, we must deal with them before we. Another explosion rocked the ground beneath them. A loud crack echoed through the tunnel as a section of the ceiling collapsed. Vorkin cursed and leaped backward just in time. Ethan grabbed Scyra's wrist and pulled her away as large chunks of stone crashed between them and the general. Dust filled the air. When it finally settled, a wall of debris blocked the tunnel. Scyra coughed. Well, that's one way to get rid of him. Ethan dusted off his shirt. Remind me to thank whoever set off that explosion. But Scyra wasn't relieved. Vorkin was trapped on the other side. But they were also stuck. And time was running out. We need to keep moving, she said. The old hangar should be just ahead. Ethan nodded, following her deeper into the tunnel. The hangar bay. Minutes later, they emerged into a massive underground hangar. Rows of abandoned starships lined the walls. Most were old models, likely forgotten by the Empire long ago. The control panels flickered dimly, and dust covered everything. Ethan whistled. Nice collection. Think any of these still fly? Scyra scanned the ships. One of them has to. She hurried toward the nearest control console and tapped the screen. It flickered weakly, then powered up. Ethan leaned over her shoulder. Please tell me you can fly one of these things. Scyra shot him a look. Of course I can. I'm a princess, not helpless. Ethan smirked. Just checking. She scanned the available ships. Most were either locked or non-functional, but one, a sleek black interceptor, showed a green status light. Scyra grinned. This one's ready. Ethan clapped his hands. Perfect. Let's get out of here. But just as Scyra activated the ship's door, the hangar doors rumbled open. A dark figure stepped inside. Scyra's breath caught. It was the armored assassin. Ethan groaned. Oh, come on. This guy again. The intruder raised its weapon. Scyra acted fast. She grabbed Ethan's arm and yanked him inside the ship. Get in. The ship's door sealed shut just as a plasma blast struck the hull. Ethan scrambled into the co-pilot's seat. Please tell me you know how to start this thing. Scyra's fingers flew over the controls. The ship hummed to life, its engines glowing softly. Outside, the assassin marched closer. It raised its arm, but this time, it wasn't aiming at them. It aimed at the hangar ceiling. Scyra's eyes widened. No, 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 no. A massive explosion erupted as the assassin shot down the ceiling supports. The entire hangar began to collapse. Ethan cursed. I hate this guy. Scyra didn't hesitate. She slammed the launch sequence and gripped the controls. The ship lurched upward just as the hangar began to cave in. The assassin stood perfectly still, watching them as the debris crashed down around him. Then, the hangar disappeared in a cloud of rubble. The ship shot out of the collapsing palace, bursting into the open night sky. Scyra exhaled sharply, gripping the controls as the ship steadied. Ethan leaned back in his seat and let out a loud breath. Well, that was close. Scyra's hands were still shaking. Too close. She glanced at him. Are you hurt? Ethan gave a tired smirk. I've been better, but I'm still breathing. Scyra let out a small laugh, despite herself. Then the ship's warning alarms blared. Ethan's smile faded. What now? Scyra checked the sensors, and her stomach twisted. 3 Verethi warships were heading straight for them. The comm system crackled to life. Princess Zyra, surrender now, or we will open fire. Zyra swallowed hard. They weren't free yet. And this time, there was no tunnel to escape through. The warning from the Verethi warships echoed through the cockpit. Princess Zyra, surrender now, or we will open fire. Zyra's hands gripped the controls tightly. The sleek interceptor ship was fast, but against 3 heavily armed warships, they were outmatched. Ethan glanced at her. So, what's the plan? Because I'd rather not explode today. Zyra's mind raced. They couldn't fight. They couldn't outrun them. But maybe. She opened the comms channel. This is Princess Zyra. I demand to speak with my father. Silence. Then, a deep voice responded. You have no authority to make demands, Princess. Zyra recognized the voice. It was Commander Roland, one of her father's most trusted officers. She took a deep breath. You know I am still your princess. If you open fire on me, my father will not be pleased. Roland's voice was cold. You are a traitor, siding with a human. You have shamed the Empire. Ethan muttered, Wow, tough crowd. Zyra ignored him. She had one last chance. If you harm me, she said, the Empire will lose its best chance to stop the real threat. A pause. Roland's tone sharpened. What do you mean? Zyra took a breath. The assassin who infiltrated the palace, he wasn't human. He wasn't from any known species. And he wanted something. Something dangerous. If you shoot us down, you will never know what it is. Another silence. Ethan leaned closer and whispered, Are you bluffing? Zyra whispered back, Not really. Ethan frowned. You actually think that assassin had a bigger plan? Zyra nodded. And I think my father needs to hear it. Roland finally spoke. What proof do you have? Zyra took a chance. Scan the ruins of the palace. If I'm wrong, then fire at will. There was a long silence. Then the comms cut off. Ethan exhaled. Well, that's either a good sign or a very bad one. Zyra didn't answer. She just watched the warships, waiting for their next move. Then, without warning, the 3 warships turned away. Ethan blinked. Did they just let us go? Zyra let out a shaky breath. For now. She switched off the comms. They weren't safe yet, but at least they had time. Ethan leaned back in his seat. So, where to next? Zyra looked at the stars ahead. She had spent her whole life in the Empire, following her father's rules. But now, she turned to Ethan and smiled. Anywhere but here. Ethan grinned. I like the sound of that. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, Zyra felt something she had never felt before. Freedom.